Your soulmate is not who they pretend to be. In reality, your soulmate is about to confess they're married, but that's not the biggest secret. Something shifted last night. You may not know exactly what changed, and you may not have seen anything with your own eyes, but the atmosphere around this story feels different now. A truth that has been buried beneath hesitation, silence, appearances, and carefully chosen words is finally beginning to rise toward the surface. For a long time, you may have wondered why someone could seem so different from one moment to the next. Why could they appear confident one day and distant the next? Why could their words suggest one thing while their actions seem to suggest something completely different? There is a reason this story feels unfinished. There is a reason certain questions never received clear answers. There is a reason you may have felt that something was being left unsaid. And now, in this fictional spiritual message, imagine that the hidden truth is finally approaching the light, not because you are supposed to chase it, not because you are supposed to investigate anyone, not because you are supposed to wait around for someone else's confession, but because sometimes the most powerful turning point in a story happens when you stop trying to force an answer and allow the truth to reveal itself through actions. The person at the center of this story has been presenting an image. An image of certainty, an image of control, an image that says, everything is fine, but beneath that appearance is a complicated situation they have avoided explaining. And tonight, the mask begins to crack. The first thing that becomes impossible for them to ignore is the contradiction between who they appear to be and who they actually are. They may have spent a long time convincing themselves that keeping certain things hidden was easier than facing the consequences of honesty. Maybe they believed that if they waited long enough, circumstances would somehow change. Maybe they told themselves that the past was no longer relevant. Maybe they thought that silence was protecting everyone involved. But silence does not erase reality. Eventually, the truth becomes heavier than the secret. That is where this story begins. The confession, the unexpected truth, the revelation that changes the meaning of everything that came before it. And yet, surprisingly, the marriage itself is not the deepest part of the secret. That is what makes this story different. Because discovering that someone has a complicated relationship status would certainly change how you understand them, but discovering why they hid their circumstances, what they were afraid to admit, and what they have been avoiding within themselves can reveal something much deeper. Imagine receiving a message that begins with only a few words. I need to tell you something. Those words would immediately create questions. What happened? Why now? Why did they wait? What are they finally ready to say? The message might remain unfinished for several minutes. Then another line appears. I should have told you a long time ago. And suddenly the entire atmosphere changes. Because the confession is no longer about a small misunderstanding. It is about a truth that has been deliberately postponed. This person knows that once they say it, they cannot take it back. They know that honesty could change how they are perceived. They know they might lose someone's trust. They know that the comfortable version of the story is about to disappear. And perhaps that is exactly why they have been silent. Not because silence made everything better, because silence allowed them to avoid making a decision. There is a difference between hiding because you do not care and hiding because you are afraid of what honesty will require from you. Neither makes deception acceptable. But understanding the difference can explain why some people remain trapped in complicated situations for far longer than they should. They become attached to appearances. They become afraid of consequences. They begin living two versions of themselves, the version everyone sees, and the version they know privately. Eventually, those two versions collide. That collision is what this story is about. The person everyone thinks they know may not actually be the person they have been trying to become. They may have built a personality around being strong, independent, unaffected, and completely in control. But underneath that personality is uncertainty. They have questions they have never answered. They have choices they have never made. They have conversations they have repeatedly postponed. And last night, in this fictional story, something happened that made postponement impossible. Perhaps a conversation took place. Perhaps someone asked a question they could no longer avoid. Perhaps they saw something that reminded them of the consequences of their choices. Perhaps they simply reached the point where pretending became exhausting. Whatever the trigger was, something finally moved. The first realization was simple: I cannot keep pretending forever. That sentence carries more weight than it appears to, because pretending can become a habit. A person can become so accustomed to presenting a certain image that eventually they forget where the image ends and their real personality begins. They say what people expect. They behave according to circumstances. They make promises that sound good in the moment. They avoid difficult conversations. And then one day, they look at their life and realize that almost everything around them has been built on decisions they never fully confronted. That is why the biggest secret is not simply a relationship status. The bigger secret is the internal conflict. The person has been struggling with a truth about themselves. They may have convinced themselves that they could keep everyone satisfied. They may have believed that avoiding a decision was better than making the wrong decision. But avoiding a decision is still a decision, and eventually, it creates consequences of its own. That is where your role in this story becomes important. You are not required to solve their life. You are not responsible for repairing their choices. You do not have to become the person who carries the emotional weight of someone else's unresolved situation. A spiritual message should never encourage you to ignore reality. Instead, let this story remind you of something more valuable. Truth matters, actions matter, boundaries matter, and your peace matters. If someone has hidden something important from you, you deserve honesty. If someone is uncertain about their circumstances, they are responsible for resolving those circumstances. If someone wants to be understood, they must also be willing to communicate clearly. And if someone wants another person's trust, they must understand that trust is built through consistent actions. This is where the fictional confession becomes powerful. The person finally admits, I wasn't honest about everything. Not because the confession magically fixes the situation. It doesn't. A confession is only the beginning of accountability. The real test comes afterward. What happens next? Do they accept responsibility? Do they stop making excuses? Do they tell the truth completely? Do their actions change? Or do they simply reveal one secret while protecting another? That is why the second revelation matters. The marriage is not the biggest secret. The bigger secret is that this person has been afraid to admit that they are not living the life they actually want. They may have been maintaining a situation because it was familiar. Familiarity can feel safer than change, even when the familiar situation is unhappy. Even when it no longer reflects who someone has become, people sometimes remain in situations because leaving would require courage. And courage is not always dramatic. Sometimes courage is simply saying, "This is not working anymore." Sometimes courage is admitting, "I made a mistake." Sometimes courage is accepting, "I cannot continue pretending." And sometimes courage means understanding that another person deserves the truth, even when telling the truth is uncomfortable. That is the lesson hidden inside this fictional story. Not every secret is romantic. Some secrets are about fear, some are about insecurity, some are about guilt, some are about the inability to make a difficult decision. And some are simply about a person not yet knowing themselves, so when the confession finally arrives, it does not need to be treated as destiny. It can simply be treated as information. That distinction is powerful. Information allows you to think. Information allows you to decide. Information allows you to step back and observe. You do not have to immediately react. You do not have to immediately forgive. You do not have to immediately believe every explanation. You can pause. You can listen, you can ask questions, you can protect your own peace. That is the real transformation in this story. At the beginning, the focus seems to be on discovering what someone else has been hiding. By the end, the focus becomes discovering what you are willing to accept. That is a much deeper question. What kind of honesty do you want around you? What kind of communication do you value? What kind of behavior makes you feel respected? What boundaries protect your peace? These questions matter more than any dramatic revelation, because secrets can be fascinating, but clarity is powerful. Imagine that after finally confessing, this person says, "I thought hiding the truth would prevent everything from falling apart," and the response inside this story is not anger, it is clarity, because sometimes hiding the truth does not prevent something from falling apart, it only delays the moment when reality has to be faced. The person may finally understand that their attempt to control the outcome created more uncertainty than honesty would have created. They may realize that they cannot control how others respond, they can only control whether they tell the truth. That realization becomes the turning point, and suddenly, the story is no longer about a secret marriage, it is about accountability. It is about becoming honest enough to stop living behind an image. It is about understanding that a person cannot ask others to trust them while refusing to trust the truth themselves. This is why the fictional message continues to unfold slowly, because the first revelation is not the final revelation. There is another layer. The person has been carrying an old fear, a fear that if people saw their complete reality, they would reject them, so they created a version of themselves that seemed easier to accept. Maybe they acted confident because they felt uncertain. Maybe they acted detached because they cared too much about being judged. Maybe they appeared calm because they were overwhelmed internally. Maybe they acted as though nothing mattered because admitting that something mattered would make them vulnerable, and eventually, the performance became exhausting. That is the hidden secret. They were not simply hiding circumstances, they were hiding insecurity. They were afraid of being seen. And being truly seen can be terrifying for someone who has spent years controlling their image. But there is another truth here. You cannot build a healthy connection around an illusion. No matter how beautiful the illusion seems, reality eventually demands attention. A person who truly wants trust must be willing to be known as they actually are. Not as the perfect version. Not as the mysterious version. Not as the version that says all the right things, the real version, the complicated version, the accountable version, the version capable of admitting mistakes. That is where genuine growth begins. So perhaps the most important message is not, your soulmate is secretly married. Perhaps the deeper message is, do not fall in love with an image of someone you have not truly gotten to know. That is a lesson worth remembering. Sometimes people project qualities onto others because they want the story to be meaningful. Sometimes uncertainty makes imagination fill in the missing pieces. Sometimes a person seems mysterious because there is simply not enough information. And when there is not enough information, it is wise to wait before deciding what the story means. Let actions provide the evidence. Let honesty provide the foundation. Let time reveal consistency. And let your own judgment remain stronger than a dramatic promise in this fictional narrative. The confession continues. I have been afraid. That admission changes everything. Not because fear excuses dishonesty. It doesn't. But because now the conversation can finally reach the real issue, fear. Fear of disappointing people. Fear of making the wrong decision. Fear of losing stability. Fear of being judged. Fear of starting over. Fear of admitting that the life someone created no longer feels right. Fear can make people complicated, but fear can also be confronted, and when it is confronted, the person has a choice: continue hiding, or begin changing. That choice cannot be made for them. You cannot make it for them. Nobody can. A person's growth belongs to that person. That is why this story should never be interpreted as a command to wait endlessly for someone to change. Instead, it is a reminder to watch what people do after they say they want to change. Words begin the process. Actions prove it. Consistency builds trust. And time reveals whether transformation is genuine. The fictional confession reaches its most unexpected point when the person says, "The biggest secret isn't who I am with. The biggest secret is that I have been pretending to be someone I am not." There it is. The deeper truth. Not a scandal. Not a dramatic revelation. A realization. A person who has been performing a role. A person who has been afraid to admit that their current life does not match their internal reality. That does not automatically make them ready for something new. It does not mean they will suddenly become perfect. It simply means the mask has begun to fall. And when the mask falls, what remains is responsibility. That is where real change begins. You might imagine that the next moment would be filled with dramatic declarations. But sometimes the most powerful moments are quiet. There is silence. There are no promises. No grand speeches. No guarantees. only the uncomfortable. Truth sitting between two people, and sometimes silence after honesty, is healthier than endless conversation built on deception, because once the truth is spoken, everyone has the opportunity to make informed choices. That is freedom. Truth gives people freedom, even when the truth hurts, even when it changes plans, even when it ends an illusion, even when it forces someone to accept that they cannot continue exactly as they have been. The person in this story begins to understand that hiding information did not protect anyone. It only protected their own comfort. That realization can be painful. But pain can sometimes become the beginning of accountability. They begin asking themselves difficult questions. Why did I hide this? Why did I keep postponing the conversation? Why did I believe I could manage everything without consequences? Why did I think other people could make decisions based on incomplete information? And eventually, what am I going to do differently now? That final question is the most important one, because the past cannot be rewritten, but the future can be influenced by what someone chooses next, and that is where this message turns toward you. Your future does not need to depend on someone else's confession. Your peace does not need to wait for someone else's decision. Your worth does not rise or fall based on whether someone chooses you. Your life is larger than any one relationship story. Sometimes the universe of a person's imagination makes one connection feel like the center of everything. But real life is wider. There are friendships, family, goals, education, creativity, personal growth, dreams, new experiences, moments that have nothing to do with romance and yet become some of the most meaningful moments of a person's life. Never allow a dramatic story about a soulmate to convince you that your entire future depends on one person. A healthy connection should add to your life, not erase everything else. So if this fictional message feels emotionally intense, take the part that serves you and leave the rest. Take the reminder about honesty. Take the reminder about boundaries. Take the reminder that people are more complicated than appearances. Take the reminder that actions matter. But do not treat uncertainty as proof. Do not treat imagination as evidence. Do not treat a dramatic prediction as a guarantee. Real clarity comes from real communication, and sometimes the greatest spiritual lesson is learning to distinguish between intuition and assumption. Intuition can encourage you to pause. Assumption can make you create an entire story without evidence. The difference matters. If someone truly has something important to tell you, they can tell you. You do not have to become a detective. You do not have to decode every silence. You do not have to interpret every coincidence. You can simply observe, and observation is powerful because it allows reality to speak for itself. The fictional soulmate in this story has reached a crossroads. One path leads back into secrecy. The other leads toward honesty. The first path may feel easier at first, the second may be difficult, but only the second offers the possibility of genuine growth. They know this now. They also know that telling the truth does not guarantee a particular outcome. That is another lesson. Honesty is not a transaction. You do not tell the truth so someone will reward you. You tell the truth because people deserve the ability to make choices based on reality. That is what makes honesty meaningful. The person finally stops asking, "How can I make everyone understand me?" and begins asking, "How can I become someone whose actions are worthy of understanding?" That is a completely different mindset. The change is subtle, but powerful, and perhaps this is why the secret feels bigger than the marriage. The marriage is an external circumstance. The deeper secret is internal transformation. A person who has spent a long time pretending has to learn how to live honestly. That can take time. It can require uncomfortable conversations. It can require accepting consequences. It can require apologizing without expecting immediate forgiveness. It can require letting go of the desire to control how others see them, and most importantly, it can require consistency. Anyone can confess once. Real change is what happens afterward. That is the part that cannot be faked forever. If someone says they have changed, watch whether their behavior supports their words. If someone says they are being honest, watch whether they continue telling the truth when the truth is inconvenient. If someone says they respect you, watch whether they respect your boundaries when they do not get what they want. That is how clarity arrives, not through dramatic signs, through patterns, and patterns speak loudly. This story also contains a message about self-respect. Sometimes people become so focused on discovering another person's secret that they forget to ask whether the relationship itself is healthy. They want answers so badly that they stop asking whether the answers will actually help them. But information should lead to clarity, not obsession. You can care about someone and still maintain boundaries. You can understand someone's struggles without accepting harmful behavior. You can forgive someone without giving them.